trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. May the Lord add a blessing to the readers, hearers, and doers of his holy, inerrant, and infallible word. You may be seated. In December of 2016, Denzel Washington appeared on the red carpet for the world premiere of his very powerful movie, Fences. It was a movie based on a very incredible award-winning play that was created by August Wilson. And the play tells the story of a family and family life in a black home in 1950s Pittsburgh. Washington was asked by a group of journalists while he was on the red carpet for a response to a news story that proved to be fake that alleged that he had shifted his political preference from Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. And so he gave the journalists what they asked for, a response in the most Denzel Washington way possible. If you've ever heard Denzel Washington speak outside of his acting roles, then you know he has this kind of profound way of articulating a lot of wisdom. And so Denzel Washington said, quote, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information? One of the effects, he continues, is the need to be first, not even to be true anymore. So what a responsibility you all have, he looks to the journalists and continues to tell the truth. Not just to be first, but to tell the truth. He continues, we live in a society now where it's just first. Who cares? Get it out there. We don't care who it hurts. We don't care who we destroy. We don't care if it's true. Just say it, sell it. Anything you practice, you'll get good at, including garbage. Garbage is my words, not Denzel's. He had another colorful way of articulating what he was trying to articulate. Washington is getting at the heart of a problem that is intensifying with every new technological discovery we experience. With every technological or with every arrival of new technology, from the computer to the internet to social media to AI, the problem is intensifying, and it is this: how do you recognize and guard against deception in a world that's filled with so much of it? How do you guard and recognize deception or guard against deception in a world filled with so much of it? Last week, we talked about how our hyper-connectedness to the digital world is compromising our ability to be fully present and fully embodied in the actual world that God has assigned to us. Today, I want to turn our attention in this kind of special sermon series for this month, The Connected Life, and I want to talk a little bit about how our hyper-connectedness to a digital world is increasingly compromising our ability to discern truth from lies. There are two occurrences that are happening in the culture right now that have me deeply concerned. Number one is that we are living in an age of disinformation unlike any that we have ever seen before. The mobile connectedness that we have via our phones and the internet and social media and AI and hyper-partisan political commentary is fertilizing our ground so lies can sprout up quicker and spread more broadly in ways that it could only have been dreamed about in ages before. Now, don't hear me saying that we haven't experienced disinformation in powerful ways in generations before this, because we have, and history bears record of that. Every generation of humanity has and probably will experience their challenge and experience this challenge in some form. But never have we ever experienced it at the scale and the speed and the cost of production, and cost of distribution, which is extremely low right now. Never have we experienced it at this low of cost and this speed and this pace. And that has me deeply concerned. But here's the second part of my deep concern. The church is not immune to this intensity of deception. In fact, I can say this based on my own anecdotal experiences and based on what research is beginning to show us, that the church may, in some cases, be proving to be more susceptible to some of the lies of this age of disinformation. Too often, it is the church that many conspiracy theories find their oxygen. Too often, it's the church that's sharing all of the misinformation and disinformation, and in some cases, flat out lies. And they're gaining their traction in the most unlikely place, in the church. They find their greatest welcome too often in the most unlikely place, the church. This should not be. Especially given the fact that we are called to live and walk by the Spirit, who gives us the ability to discern truth from lies. So these two thoughts are weighing heavy on my mind this morning as we walk through this series together. We are living in a very interesting and challenging time as it relates to disinformation, and the church is too often caught up in the lies that are told rather than walking in the discernment that we've been given and we've been supplied by the Spirit. So this morning I want to speak a little about the origins of disinformation. I want to speak a little bit about the heart of disinformation, and then quickly I'll talk a little bit about the escape out of disinformation. Let's talk about the origins of disinformation. It is not mere happenstance that lies and deceit so deeply shape our world, because the Bible captures the first human struggle in human history as a struggle between truth and lies. Verse 1 of chapter 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? As we think about the origins of disinformation, we would do well by just simply starting with the origins of human history, going back to the Garden of Eden. The first thing that I find fascinating about the garden in terms of deception and lies and disinformation, and the most fascinating, or the first thing that I find most fascinating about what takes place in the garden is the very first description that we are given for the enemy of our souls. Not evil, not destructive, even though he is, not hateful, even though he is. Like he's number one on the list of player haters. Not powerful, even though he wields power as being the God of this world, according to Paul. But the first description we're ever given of the enemy of our souls is crafty. Achrum in the Hebrew. Crafty, cunning, clever, crafty, shrewd, sensible. And if none of those words resonate with you, there's a word that we used to use back in the day to describe figures of this type that we find in the Garden of Eden. Slick. We would hear that back in the day a whole lot, at least in my day. Maybe not in your day, but my day. Oh, he think he's slick. Oh, she thinks she's slick. And when I was in trouble for deceiving my parents for a host of different reasons growing up, I might have heard a couple of times those dreaded words, oh, you think you slick. It captures this word very well, though, this ideal of being crafty. Isn't that fascinating that the very first description that we get of the enemy of our souls is a word akin to slick? You see, slick people aren't considered slick because they speak in ways that are overtly false. They are considered slick because they speak in ways that are enticingly false. They speak in ways that are true-ish. We see this again in the garden with not crazy, absurd statements, but rather true-ish statements. Words that are slightly off-center. Not true, but close enough to make you question what you heard in the beginning. Verse 1, he said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Is that what he said? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. True-ish, slightly off-center. There's a lot to be said there that you can argue, okay, yeah, it sounds kind of right. But he's been doing this from the beginning of time. What did God really say, D.L. Port? Did he really say, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth? I certainly don't see meek people inheriting much in this life, getting much in this life. What do you think, Corey? What did God say? Did he really say, Crawford, flee from sexual immorality? Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but sexually immoral person sins against his own body? But how, Brian? I can't possibly see how sex before covenant marriage between husband and wife would be harmful in any way if two people really love one another. It's just natural. Right? What do you think, Brian? Did God really say, did he really say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven? For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. I mean, I get Jesus is super holy, so he can certainly do that, but he definitely can't expect you to do that. Can he? Not in this age. Not with these people. Right? I mean, what do you think, Brian? True-ish statements. Slightly off-center, not true, but close enough to make you question what you've heard. By the way, this is the heart language of the devil. And this is what fills our TV screens. This is what fills our phone screens. This is what fills our social media news feeds and our radio airwaves every single day of the week. Every single hour somewhere you will find true-ish, slightly off-center statements to question what you originally heard. One of the best ways that we can describe the age of disinformation that we are currently living in is an age of true-ish information. And this is not new territory for the devil. I just mentioned that this is his heart language, and you might be asking, what do you mean, Brian? What I mean is that this is where he lives. This is his home address. One of the first steps in living more discerningly in an age of true-ish disinformation is understanding the field in which the devil operates from. This is his home field. Jesus declares in John chapter 8, verse 44, you are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and an important and, does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. His heart language. When he lies, Jesus tells us in this verse, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Sit with that for a moment. Lies are the heart language of the devil. This means every opportunity made available to him will be an opportunity he seizes to sow lies and deceits about God, to sow lies and deceit about ourselves, to sow lies and deceit about how we see one another. Every single opportunity. He lives in the wastelands of deception and true-ish disinformation. So he will use every opportunity. 24-hour news cycle, no problem. He poisons the waters by driving us to believe the worst about one another based on our complexion or our countries of origin or our political affiliations. Social media, no problem. He sows deceit using endless pictures of perfect bodies, perfect trips, perfect lives, leading us to suspect that our normal bodies, regular trips, and mundane lives are not simply ordinary, but deficient, worthy of nothing but taking steps to end them. Artificial intelligence, no problem. He deceptively leverages it to flood our streams of communication with voices, images, and videos that leave us exhausted, investigating what's actually real versus enjoying and marveling at what truly is. Lies are the heart language of the devil. And from the beginning until now, he has never had more opportunities to share his heart with us. When you begin to truly understand that deception, lies, and disinformation have been the main weapons of destruction for the enemy, you will begin to understand how important it is to cry out to the Lord regularly for discernment. Because you understand that lies are just being sown. It's just in the water everywhere you turn. Here's another thing that I find fascinating about the origins of disinformation. The Bible starts the story of our enemy with the deception of, or description of craftiness to make it plain that the human struggle is one in which we are battling lies, deception, and disinformation throughout our history. But the Bible ends the story the same way. Bible starts the story this way, but then when you look at Revelation chapter 22, verse 15, the very last word that we get on the enemies of God in the Bible, these enemies, they are placed on the outside according to Revelation, and this is what we hear. Verse 14, blessed are those who wash their robes so that they may have the right to the tree of life and that they may enter the city by the gates. And this is the last word that we hear about the enemies of God in the story. Verse 15, outside are the dogs and sorcerers and the sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters. And here's the very last thing we hear about the enemies of God. And everyone who loves and practices falsehood. The Bible begins the story of human struggle with the introduction of craftiness, lies, deception, disinformation, slick. But incredibly, the Bible ends the story the same way, with the casting out of those that were speaking the heart language of craftiness, lies, deception, disinformation. In other words, the Bible is saying that Jesus will have the final say over our slick enemy. So this captures the origin of disinformation, but let's look a minute at the heart of disinformation. Why do we gravitate so easily to the digital deceptions? Believe it or not, it's not merely as much due to the devices as it is to the hearts that wield it. Verse 5, chapter 3. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. And you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were open, and they knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. There's this really, really interesting play on words that's happening in Genesis chapter 2, the latter part of chapter 2 into chapter 3, by the way. There's this really interesting play on words. Genesis 2 ends with this word, this story, this testimony, this beautiful picture where it says that they were naked and not ashamed, right? Is that, you guys remember that? The word naked is coming out of a Hebrew word, ahruhim. And then as soon as it finishes, and remember, there are no chapter breaks, so it just kind of continues right on through from those words, and they were naked and not ashamed, ahruhim, naked, and then it says, Akhrum. The serpent came, and he was Akhrum. So they were Akhruhim. The serpent came, and he was Akhrum. What is it saying? It's saying that they were naked, unashamed. There was nothing but truth in them. They were not hiding. They were not in the shadows. But the first struggle they experienced was one who lived in the shadows. And when he came, and when he tempted, he disarmed their nakedness and brought them to the shadows. The fall was more than just simply sin. The fall was the uncovering of honesty, purity, the ability to just simply go live life without any shadows, with nothing to hide. Because there was no shame, there was no judgment. There was no tricks, there was no craftiness. But then Satan came and he tempted and he drew us in to the shadows. So where's the heart of disinformation? Let's ask that question. Well, the heart of disinformation, interesting, is not your phone, it's not your screens, it's not your laptops or your TVs. The heart of disinformation is your heart. Because if you look, what you notice is that Satan goes exactly there. Now, when we talk about the heart in the garden, we have to get pretty theological, right? Because we know our hearts post-fall. Jeremiah chapter 17:9 tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? We know that since the fall, our heart has become corrupted with deception and every other evil thing. We sing, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. We know what's in us. That is the posture of our hearts that God by his Spirit has given us, or God has given us his Spirit to cover us and Christ to cleanse us. We know that about us, but what is the posture of our hearts, or what's the posture of Eve's heart? Because Eve hasn't fallen yet. And interesting enough, the theologians have a concept for it. I learned this concept, believe it or not, years and years ago from the man sitting on the front row, Joe Johnson. Sinless, but able to sin. Passe peccare. So Eve is sinless in the garden. Adam is sinless in the garden, but given will to hear, make decisions, and then respond to the tempter's voice. What the theologians talk about in the end is that when we are redeemed and our bodies have been restored and we have been glorified and raised with Christ and in the heavens, we will be non-passe peccare, sinless but unable to sin. Does that make sense? So what's happening here is, even though these are deep theological terms, the bottom line is that what Satan is striking at is the heart of the heart. He's striking at desire. Disinformation and deception finds its most fertile ground in the twisting of our desires. Notice how he twists Eve's desire here in this text. Notice how he twists the desire. He twists the desire in a couple of different ways, but let me point to two. One, pride. Second, payoff. He twists the desire through pride and through payoff. Verse 5, pride. For God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Oftentimes, we are susceptible to the lies because of the appeal to our desire that is found in our pride. To be more, to be seen as more. There was a landmark study in 2020 in the journal, and you can find it in the Science Journal or in the journal called Science, written by 16 researchers across psychology and political science. They gave a name to what's happening right now in us. They called it political sectarianism. They chose the word deliberately over tribalism because tribal's picture is more like kinship, but sectarian's picture is more like religion. And they said what's happening in us as we look at the political climate is feeling more religious in nature versus just simply tribal in nature. And they found 3 ingredients converge in us now. Othering, seeing the other side as basically alien to us, pride. Aversion and disliking and trusting them as a result of seeing them as alien to us. And moralization, believing that they are not just wrong, but they are wicked and we are righteous. I want you to sit with that third one. Because moralization means that we've quietly appointed ourselves and our side the judges of good and evil. We don't just disagree with the other side anymore. We've decided to get to say what's righteous and what's sinful. And that's not just a political posture. That's Genesis 3 and 5. You will know both good and evil. We say, nope, I don't want to hear anything you got to say. I don't want to hear any of your ideas. I don't want to hear any of your thoughts. I already know what I need to know. And I know that you're evil and I'm good. And research shows that pride is now fueling, not simply affection for our own side, but pride in it. Researchers have been digging in and they've discovered that Americans dislike the opposing party more than they like their own. It's not that they look at their opposing party and say, hey, there's some good things I agree with in my party. They just say, it's not like they look at their party and say, there's some great things I agree with in my party. They just say, no, those people are evil, and vice versa. We are less devoted to what we love about our parties than proud of what we're against. And this is why correcting a false claim from someone in our own camp so rarely lands the way correcting an opposing claim does. Accepting a correction isn't a neutral update of belief anymore. Accepting a correction feels like betrayal of my group. Does that make sense? That's why it's so hard to accept it. Because when you bring truth my way, it's like, oh my goodness, what are my people gonna say? And now how does that make me look to those people? And so therefore we'll share a lie on social media in a heartbeat. But then when somebody proves that lie to be a lie, instead of saying, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I shared that, so many of us just stop talking. We just go dark. Why? Because pride has been wounded. Do you understand? And so what's shaping the way we're feeding on this information is the pride. The pride in who I am. The pride in the side I'm on. But I mentioned that it's not just pride that's shaping how we consume it, but it's also payoff. Genesis 6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. The tree was good for food. The tree was a delight to the eye, so she bought into the deception because what she saw was a payoff. Eve wasn't tricked by an ugly lie. I need you to understand that. Most of us aren't. Most of us are tricked by beautiful lies. Does that make sense? Have any of you ever said, oh, no, I don't want that. That's ugly. Oh, man, I can't believe I fell for that. That's not how that works, right? It's not how it works. We're tricked by, it's like, ooh. Oh, wow. I gotta think twice about what I was believing before this. She was drawn in by this beautiful looking lie. And the beauty itself was the bait. So that's precisely rather how the reward system in our pockets are built now. Researchers are publishing more and more research where they find that features that have been given to us like and shares activate the brain's own reward circuitry. And so what happens, when we get a like, we want to post more. But guess what induces the most likes and shares? Guess what goes viral? False information, outrage information, outrage-provoking content. All of these things trigger in us a reward because those are the things that people love to let take off and go viral. And those are the things that the algorithm will incentivize as you send. It will allow you to send it because everybody loves to be angry. And so that will be what shows up in your feed, and that will be what gets posted and shared and spread around. And you will get this payoff when you read it because you feel like you're in the know, and when you share it because you'll get the likes and the shares behind it. So it will be rewarding you and giving you payoff, and it will also be lowering your discernment. What you have to understand is that the systems that you will, the tools that you will, right, they are not simply neutral. They've been optimized to create engagement. They've been optimized to keep you there. And what creates engagement is outrage. Even before any money changes hands, there's a payoff simply in you sharing. There was an original MIT study on how false news spreads, and it found that falsehood feels more novel, feels more new than truth. And sharing new and novel information makes the sharer look like someone who's in the know. Does that make sense? See, ain't none of y'all know about this, but I do my research. I do my research. Let me put y'all on, let you know what's really real. Are you following me? You hear that payoff? That payoff allows our discernment to wither. Researchers found that status feeling is freeing when you get that status feeling. And it's instant. And it has nothing to do with whether or not that information you share was real. But it's not just a metaphorical payoff. You have to understand that this information now has an actual payoff. Money being put in the hands of people for sharing. There are plenty of platforms out there, social media platforms that pay users real money. Not because they're lying, but because of their engagement. And what do I mean by that? As long as you're generating traffic, there is an incentive and you get paid for how much traffic you generate. So no one asks whether or not the traffic you generate anymore is true or false. They just ask, are you keeping eyes glued on the screen? And if you keep eyes glued on the screen, then there is a financial incentive for you. There was a discovery recently where researchers found that 30%, and sometimes even larger in some cases in some of their measurements, but at least 30% of the false information that comes through the social media waves are coming through from 0.0003% of its users. Just a small group of people that are sowing so much of the disinformation and so much of the discord because it is financially lucrative for them to do so. We are not just emotionally rewarded for spreading what inflames us. In a growing number of cases, we're finding out that we are financially, physically rewarded for the inflaming. Ancient wisdom calls this the desire of the eyes. Our generation has just figured out how to monetize it. So that's what Eve saw. And that's what Eve felt. Desire was pulling her towards the deception. This, by the way, should not be new to you. If you've ever read the New Testament, and you look at 2 Timothy, you hear the words from Paul to Timothy, his protege, and saying, hey, Timothy, get ready. Verse 2, preach the word in season. Be ready in season and out of season. Rebuke, correct, encourage with great patience and teaching. And then he says this, for a time is coming when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own, there's the word, desires. having itching ears. They will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. The desire is drawing us into falsehood. Do you understand? So how do we escape it? How do we escape it? We escape it by the strength of God's Spirit, reminding us and drawing us back to our desire being Jesus, Christ. Christ. Not to be my own God, not to be right, not to be on one side or the other, but to be like him. There's so much protection from disinformation when our hearts are yearning to just simply be like Jesus. John chapter 14, verse 6 says, Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Jesus is the truth. Following in his way, we find truth. Looking to simply imitate him, we find truth. Looking to sit at his feet rather than the feet of Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. We are freed from the deception. John chapter 8, verse 31, Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. Listen, if you abide in my word, if you live, if you rest in my word, if you are not simply tethered to the digital, but you are tethered to me and tethered to my words and connected to me and connected to my words, you are truly my disciples in verse 32, and you will know the truth. And the truth will set you free. Reality is that so much of where we are right now is that we are so connected to the digital and so scarcely connected to Christ and his word that it leaves us wide open for our desires to be led to false wastelands. When we stay connected to the way and the truth of Jesus, when we let Jesus shape our thoughts more than the information sources of the day, even when the information sources are telling you that they represent Jesus. Do you understand that? Do you understand that the whole notion of false prophets are people that say, listen, I represent Jesus and here's what he said. You don't have to look for him. You don't have to read about him. You don't have to read what he says. I'll tell you what he said. I'll tell you how you should think about this. You don't have to look at what he says about it. I already know what he says about it. No. Don't be tethered to the prophets of the day, whether they're on screens on your phones or screens on news channels. Don't be tethered to them. Be tethered to Christ. Let him tell you what he says about himself. Thankfully, you can read about it. Let him tell you. What does thus say the Lord? Not thus say the Lord according to this Democrat or thus say the Lord according to this Republican. What does thus say the Lord? How has the Lord called you to walk? Not how they've called you to walk. How has the Lord called you to walk? So 2 points of application, and I'm done. Keep watch on your desire. Keep watch on your desire. Keep watch on your passions. Keep watch on your passions. In order to protect yourself from disinformation in this age, you must be vigilant and alert on how your passions can draw you to truish statements. In other words, there are times in which I have seen in my own life and in my own heart, me being so committed to something that I see across my screen, not because I've evaluated whether or not it's true, but because it just affirms what I already wanted to believe anyway. Has that happened to you? And before you know it, you're ready to share it. Oh, look at this. This tells them exactly what I believe. But is it true? Don't allow it to run through the filter of your passion. Allow it to run through the filter of truth. Before you say, I like it, say, is it true? Not do I like it. Before you say, does it agree with my group, ask, is it true? Be committed to whether or not it's true, not whether or not it fits your passion. Keep watch on your ego. In other words, keep watch on your pride. Keep watch on your desires and your passions, but keep watch on your ego and your pride. Whenever people begin to be placed, or wherever or whenever you have placed yourself in an in-group or an out-group, be watchful that the pride you experience from being in that in-group doesn't blind you to lies that come from within your group. Or be careful that it doesn't blind you from the truth that could come outside of your group. Does that make sense? Because what happens is that when we take so much pride in being in an in-group and people being on the outside of that group, then we believe everything that our group has to say. And we treat like lies everything that group and those people have to say. Be watchful of getting your news from sources that yearn to dunk on the other side. And it happens on both sides, by the way, left and right. Picked up some headlines for you. Dunking on the right, it sounds like this. Leaked. What conservative lawmakers really say about you behind closed doors. Click. Let me see what they say about me behind closed. No, don't click. Don't click. That's what they call clickbait. Here's another one. This governor just quietly signed away your rights while you weren't looking. Well, I'll be doggone. Let me see what he has. No, don't click it. Don't click it. Don't click the things that bait you into in-groups and out-groups. It comes from the left too. Leaked. The radical plan coastal elites don't want small-town America to see. I'm in small town, I'm in Vicksburg. Let me see what they got to say. No, don't click it. Does that make sense? Leaked. School district just quietly rewrote what your kids are taught. No vote required. Man, I'm so angry about that. Let me click it. No, don't click it. Find credible news. Don't allow the clickbait to draw you into a place of deception, is my point. Don't allow your passions, don't allow your ego and your pride to draw you into deception. Guard your hearts. Guard your hearts. Let's pray.